Okay, so I guess we should talk about range then, huh? Huh? All right, let's do it. So what do we have for range classes, right? Are there any range classes that need to be broken down into specs? Yes, multiple, actually. So we got Warlocks. We have at least Affliction and Destro need to be separate. BM and MM don't really need to be separate. So for people who play Hunter, again, I'm not too familiar with BM because we don't play it for any reason. But just tell me the thing that makes Wild Spirits so good, being that it is the single best, like, burst 4 to 5 target CD while also doing boss damage CD in the entire game. That's why it's so good right now. Does BM, is that also true for BM? It's true for BM too, yes. Okay, sweet. All right, we'll leave it then. All Hunters can be together. All right, where do you guys want to start? Let's talk about Affliction. So Affliction does a couple of things really well. So I'm actually going to maybe surprise you here. Affliction is a class that obviously it has value, but it doesn't actually, like right now, the reason Affliction is so good is because of tuning. They don't actually do anything great. I'm going to kind of leave it in the middle for now before we figure it out. We're just going to talk about it. Affliction is one of the very best range specs for movement. Their damage is almost entirely front-loaded in their cooldowns, and then for the next couple minutes, you can almost freely move with just putting up your dots. Like, it's not exactly that simple, but it's kind of like that. Affliction is tuned really well right now, so you see them in raid, but you have to ask yourself, what do they really do better than other classes? There's one strat we almost did in Mythic this raid, is Absolute Corruption with Warlocks was good enough where I think the number in a 3.5 minute P2 of Denathrius, 6 Warlocks with Absolute Corruption would kill all 4 Horsemen over the course of the phase without ever swapping to them. And they don't do raid damage unless you like go near them, so you could play around it. So that was something you can almost do, and that's something that you can literally only do with Affliction Lock. So I'm just going to judge them based on that. Now, again, I'm going to put them down on dependent on tuning. For the sole reason that I think they are really tuning based, and I actually think Destro, even though it's under tuned right now, actually has much more clear niches involved in stuff it can actually do versus other specs in the game. But it's not a new thing, but that is something that had been Affliction been good, but it hasn't been a thing in a long time. With how good a lot of different classes are right now, I find it highly unlikely you're going to run enough range to do that. They also do have the slow ring still, and the slow ring is definitely powerful, but definitely not enough, I don't think, to put them at the top. They are dependent on tuning, but as you guys will see for classes dependent on tuning, sometimes that works. It's good enough, right? All right, so let's talk about Destro. I actually think Destro right now is one of the worst tuned specs it's been in a long time, but I actually think it's up here with a class that has clear value or niche. It's historically one of the best, if not the best, spread out 2-target damage over the course of the fight, and certainly the best 2-target damage in a short amount of time. A perfect example would be like Raden, right? So limit Raden kill. What do you see at the beginning of the fight? We didn't do any Warlock cheese, by the way. This is just straight up Warlocks playing Destro, the Vita Orb spawning at the beginning, which was our strat. And the Warlocks, as soon as the second target comes out, they do their initial havoc in their cooldowns, and you're going to see every single Warlock shoot to the top, right? So just the whole idea overall for a long time of Warlocks, just Destro cleaving has just been insanely strong when it's tuned well. Right now, like I said, Destro is so historically low tuned that it's not as good, but it provides a lot of value there. Also, I'm pretty sure this is true. I just need a confirmation from Warlocks in the chat. I know in beta they did do a very high amount of mass AoE. I think the classes you guys are seeing doing huge uncapped AoE right now is like Fire Mage is kind of the one that's like the most prevalent. But I want to know if Destro can still, with the right talents, can still do uncapped AoE, like huge uncapped AoE, or did they nerf that? Okay, so and they just got buffed, and their AoE is still has really good AoE. All right, cool. So I think it has. I'm gonna have one Warlock go in the classes with clear value or a niche situation because it clearly does something better than every class in the game, which is the point of this list. Okay, you guys want to do Demo? You guys are mad that I'm forgetting Demo. I guess you're right, because some people are going to watch this and be like, but I'm a Demo Warlock main and you forgot me. All right, we'll talk about Demo. It's dependent on tuning. If anything that Demo gets to its credit is it's usually so not looked at that it's been one of the best classes in the game or the single best class in the game, and it wasn't figured out until after progression twice now. In Battle to Zaralor, it was the best class it might have been one of the most ahead of every other class in the game situations ever in Battle to Zaralor with that build, and then it got nerfed to all hell. And none of the Warlock community figured it out, or at least the very best Warlocks in the world didn't run it until World First had already been done and the week after that. And then obviously everyone caught on, and then it got nerfed. There's also a meme Demo build right now. I don't know if it's been showing on logs. I'm not sure if people are running it or not because Affliction is so strong. But let's look, like Hungry Destroyer. Let's just do like 95th, maybe 97th. So Demo's a top 7, top 8 class, and apparently it has something to do with like you like get enough health, so it's like kind of degenerate. So like you want a Warlock to keep or a Shaman to keep Ancestral Vigor on them, and you want warriors to Rallying Cry during their cooldowns, and like like just absolutely, like I don't know why every time Demo is good, it's because of some ridiculous meme situation. Like they run Battlemaster PvP trinkets, and then last expansion it was like an AoE Azerite trait that just made their single target go through the roof. So yeah, so Demo, without really going too much further, Demo is heavily dependent on tuning, slash if you could even add it, if you added extra text on the end just for Demo, extremely weird shit. Like that's the only way to describe Warlock. All right, so Moonkin. Let's do Moonkin. All right, so Moonkin, extremely good right now. Maybe the single best range spec. I know that's going to sound crazy because, like, Mage is, like, really strong. Hunter's strong, but a little overrated. Shadow Priest is actually strong right now, even though it's a little underrated. Well, I don't know if it's underrated in logs, but it's definitely underrated in, like, community perception. But, like, Shadow's, like, really, really good right now. For certain things. We'll get into that. But Moonkin does two things. Moonkin has like the Shadow Priest niche from last expansion, where why Shadow was constantly so good, besides the fact that they scaled so well, was that they did the best spread out damage of any fight, right? So like if you look at a boss like Queen's Court from last expansion, where you have like 2 spread out bosses, like a Shadow Priest is going to top every pull, or like a couple of their daughters might be close. So like just an example, this is our Queen's Court kill. Okay, Lip was an alt priest. Like, he had, like, 10 less eye levels than everyone else in this raid and no Benthic gear, and he still was, like, topping, right? Because we didn't run a priest for progression in Eternal Palace. And then, like, Lip's alt on a boss like Zakul, right? Which is probably a better example. That same character, which was an alt that we did not use on Ashara and only used for these, if you look near the end of the fight, like, there's always Shadow Priest just dunking on everyone else in the raid, right? That's us in London. So he's doing 10k more than everyone else in the raid. Why? Because you know, there's just ads spread out over the entire platform that no one else is hitting, and Priest multi-dotting was just out of this world. That has changed in this expansion. That is now Moonkin. Moonkin does far more spread out damage, especially the more targets you add. If you look at any situation like the room in Halls of Atonement right before the last boss, or just any theoretical raid fight you can think of that might happen. Again, this isn't as much for bosses that are happening now, but for bosses in the future, it's always a thing in raids where just having the best, like a class you can stack to do X, which is like your niche, is what Moonkins do the best right now. Spread out ads, they can't be touched. Council is a good example. If you don't have a lot of DKs gripping ads under the boss, Moonkins are just going to top that fight by like 2k or something. It's just way too good. So Moonkin is there. Also, they have Convoke. Convoke for both Feral and Moonkin is like ridiculously busted, and it's one of like the best. Again, it's a little overrated in PvE specifically. Like it's huge on Sludgefist, but it's like borderline bad on Council, even if you use it for attendance at the beginning. It's absolutely bad on Stone Legion Generals, which is arguably the hardest fight in the raid. It's good on Denathrius only in the last phase, because it's the only hard phase, and P2 doesn't matter, and P1's a joke. So like it's really good, and it's like really noticeable in dungeons. But again, this is only about raids, right? So I mean, yeah, Moonkins are just crazy. Also, Moonkins are unkillable. They have insane movement CDs to deal with stuff like Seeds on Zymox, like one of the better movement classes in the game on a shorter CD. They're in an absolute insane spot right now. I would say for the rest of the expansion, unless things are changed significantly, Moonkins are going to be minimum 2 in every world first raid comp on every boss for the rest of the expansion. Maybe 3 with how strong they. I actually don't think they've been this strong for multiple expansions, and it's not because of tuning. It's because there's multiple things they do. They actually have 2 things. Again, convoke in certain situations, and then the thing in all situations is they do the best spread out cleave. That's invaluable in every raid tier. It's why it's so good. All right, so what do we got? So we have Hunter. Hunter is okay, so let me be very clear with Hunter. Hunter right now in PvE, especially raiding, I think it's not overrated because Wild Spirits is so good, but people actually need to understand why Hunter is the way it is. Okay? Hunter is literally Wild Spirits away from being here. If you actually take Wild Spirits away from Hunter right now, they're excessively average. But Wild Spirits is just so broken. One of the strongest niches in raid in general, the 2 strongest probably, are Burst Small Target AoE, or just Burst Small Burst in general, which they also possess, and like Execute. Those are like the 2 probably most prevalent niches, and Wild Spirits is so by far better than everything else in the game. Their weaknesses, their single target is average. Target swapping is good, but single target is average. They have really weak defensives. They have probably the worst immunity in the game. It was really good in this raid. In fact, there were multiple things that Turtle worked on that nothing else did. So like Turtle was actually kind of insane. But they're the squishiest class in raid. It's not close. They will die before any other class will die. And Turtle often, not this raid, but often doesn't work on things that true immunities are usually just superior for. Is Hunter Execute even good? It's I think Hunter Execute is not bad. I remember, here's again, I don't know the full numbers of it, and we'll look at statistics in a second. Isn't Shadow squishiest? Disc is squishiest on Sludge Fist. Hunter is not as squishy as Shadow on Sludge Fist because they have mail armor and not cloth armor. Priests are really tanky on any fight. Shadow Priest are super tanky. Shadow Priest is actually like insanely tanky. It's also Hunter's a good PI target around the 2-minute mark. Same thing for Affliction. We didn't mention that earlier, but only in certain scenarios. I don't think Affliction's good for. I would actually rather PI a Shadow Priest than an Affliction lock on literally any boss except for Sludge Fist. It's just too good on specifically Sludge Fist. Just to be completely clear with Hunter, Hunter is a class heavily dependent on tuning. If it wasn't for literally Wild Spirits, and Wild Spirits alone is the only reason it's going to be in this top list. And that's for both BM and MM. But they're basically majorly, and they have been majorly dependent on tuning for like 2 expansions now. They're just not unique enough as a range spec. Shaman right now is just dependent on tuning, and their tuning is good right now. They actually do really sick single target. If you look at Hungering Destroyer, 95th percentile, 75th percentile on a class that's frequently not getting PI'd, they're actually shredding right now. And funny enough, they were basically unviable for Mythic progress, because if you go to their trinket situation, I don't know if you all know, or if a lot of people know this, but this is their main legendary, and this was not available until Mythic was actually done. Mythic World First was over before they had access to this legendary. Insane. Like, it's incredible. I can't believe it. And like I said, I don't know if they would have been brought to progression. They're actually like an objectively better DPS class for Hunter, except for the fact that Wild Spirits exists. But I mean, Ellie's always in this weird spot where it's like not quite brought to progression, because it's just so much harder to bring these classes to progression, because they're they just don't really have the stuff you need, you know. I don't really need to say much more on that. I will say that Ellie Shaman last expansion was actually up here, because their fulmination funnel and their ability to have multiple flame shocks out and then funneling lava burst into one target. Funnel is probably the 3rd most important raid niche, and they basically completely removed it. They're not a niche spec for that anymore. They're basically just single target characters with decent AoE, but they don't funnel. So they are moved down here to be relegated with the rest of those classes. Not to say that they're bad. Like I said, Affliction's arguably one of the best DPS specs, probably top 3, but it's because it's tuned really well, not because the class is designed really well. All right, let's do Mage. Okay. Fire Mage, clear value. Fire Mage, insane, okay, so let's go over all the reasons why Fire Mage is insane. They are maybe the tankiest spec in the entire game. You took already maybe the tankiest spec in like I would say Fire Mage and Nyalotha competed with Havoc Demon Hunter for survivability with just their cheat death and immunity. And on top of that, this expansion, Havoc got nerfed. Fire Mage gained alter time. They gained a second cheat death. And if they want to in content in the future or now, they can equip a legendary that gives them like a full absorb, like almost no time. I mean, they are unbelievable. And this goes for all mages, except for the fact that they have like a cheat death. And I promise you, cheat deaths are more valuable than like Frost having a second immunity, for example. It's just so strong. What are other things Fire does? Fire has execute, on average, the most important raid niche. Oh, and images, yeah. And also an invisibility conduit to make them like go really fast for mechanics, just like crazy shit like that. What else they have? They have the highest mass AoE in the game currently. They have a 1-minute burst CD. That's also insanely important. They can also basically freely move in execute, aka the hardest part of every mythic end boss, where they also do extra damage because they're in execute. Fire Mage is absolutely fucking ridiculous, and it probably should be in this list multiple times. All right, Frost, also up here. This was not true until recent buffs, but Frost Mage has immense value at the moment in this game, and it's for one specific reason. They have the probably third most important niche in all damage doing capability, and that is funnel. And they are the single best funnel in the game by a lot. Feral Druid is slightly behind, but, or not slightly, like Feral Druid is, but like Frost Mage, if you're doing any fight, one that's pretty, just, I'll explain funnel just for people. Every time I say this, people are confused. What funnel means is picture 5 targets that you're doing damage to, but it's not AoE. You don't care about your overall damage. The only thing you care about is your primary damage to one target. So basically, the other 4 targets will just be passively cleaved down. And passive cleave is another really strong niche. Fury Warrior is great at it. Frost Mage is also good at it, because they're what they use to funnel actually does a lot of damage, being Frozen Orb. Where like famous funneling mechanics like Rogues using Eviscerate after fanning, that was like, it basically fan did no damage, so it was like, that was the most pure funnel. But like Frost right now, if you need to do damage to one target in the game that's surrounded by 4 other targets, a Frost Mage will beat every single class in the game on that one target. And that's it happens all the time. Stone Legion Generals, best example, you know? On Stone Legion Generals, you have like the Goliath here, you have a boss right next to it. I'm gonna make a bunch of Shriekwings, but you have a boss right next to it, and then you have what, four little skirmishers right here. Now imagine a boss scenario where the big Goliath here is the only thing that matters, and everything else is just to buff your Frozen Orb ice lances into this target, and that's why Frost Mage is insane. Just it's that kind of fight exists usually once or twice in a raid tier, and it's like insanely important. All right, so Frost Mage is there. It also has 2 immunities. That's kind of interesting, and it brings a raid buff. Arcane is down here. It brings a raid buff, yes. Arcane also routinely sims really, really high. But I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this. Fire and Arcane almost always sim close together in most raid tiers, but anyone who's ever played Mage will know that there's nothing less accurate than how a class actually performs in a raid than a 5-minute single target sim. Not only do most bosses not exist that even somewhat come close to replicating a 5-minute single target sim, but Arcane is so screwed by movement when Fire moves effortlessly, even with Shimmer. It's just majorly noticeable, and they don't really do anything in the game that's exceptional that where Fire and Frost do. So they're definitely in a different tier. All right, now Shadow Priest. I'm a little torn because Shadow Priest is actually really fucking good. and all of their secondaries are good, so they're set to scale like they have been in other expansions. I think if they, like, my thing, the whole expansion, so there's two things I think they should do with Shadow Priest, to be clear. One of them is I think they should fix PI. They should make the best situation for me would be make the Twins legendary baseline for Shadow Priest and then just nerf them slightly, because I think that would make them too strong right now. Because the Talbotar's legendary is actually really, really good in raid scenarios. Because I still like the viability of, like, being able to put PI on the correct person. Like, for example, PIing some classes on AoE is way better than PIing a Shadow Priest. PIing some classes in a damage amp, the haste will affect them in that damage amp better than a Shadow Priest. Like, a Shadow Priest with PI and a Sludge Fist amp is going to go in void form, hopefully, for I think like 3 of the 4 pillars if you're Night Fae. And you're going to have a full insanity bar, devouring plagues right off the bat, and you're going to have a void torrent, and you're just going to, but like haste doesn't actually like give you that much more you're going to do in the amp, as opposed to is it 4 out of 4? Is it 4 out of 4 with Night Fae? Okay, cool. Yeah, and then you have, so yeah, like the that spec in general, and also, like, I don't know if you guys noticed this, like, even a boss like Sludge Fist, a class where priests probably give away their PI a lot, priests are still a top 5 class. If you go up to 95th percentile, they jump a spot. Like, they're really good. Or I think it's the same, actually. Is it the same? No, they jump a spot. Yeah. Shadow's one of the best overall single target damage. If you want to look at Hungering, again, Hungering's weird because, like, melee have to range the boss, but, like, I mean, you can't fake that. Like, Shadow's unironically extremely good at single target. Single target, while we're in the topic of niches, single target is still, at the end of the day, that's what wins world first. That's what wins. That's what kills the end boss, is single target. And they're tuned right now really well. They are noticeably missing the thing they had all of last expansion. It's the reason they kept having to be nerfed, is that their dots were so valuable. They were the Moonkins right now of last expansion, or last 2 expansions, basically. But they kind of lost that. Their dots kind of suck. They're basically a, like, one-trick single target DPS class. They're very weak with like multi-dotting and like burst AoE compared to other classes. But their single target is just so real, man. They do have execute. I'm actually not aware of how powerful their actual execute is. Can a Shadow Priest in the chat tell me how powerful their execute is? Sub 20? 10%? 10% is really good. 10% damage amp sub whatever is really good. But I'm not talking about I'm not talking about that one that gives you a damage buff every time you go under. Because don't you not even run that one? Or do you run that one now? I remember our priest saying that you wouldn't run. Dude, why can't I remember the name of this talent? It's been so important for multiple expansions. Twist of Fate. Yeah, dude, Twist of Fate. Holy shit. Yeah, it's like, so Twist of Fate is really good because, like, on a lot of fights, you can, like, have things randomly die, right, over the course of the fight. Like perfect example is, like, Zakul, right? Like, there's always mobs, like this Horrific Vision at 2.9%, where you're going to get a Twist of Fate to keep up during a lot of the fight. So it's not strictly an execute talent, but it's, like, you know, obviously an execute, it's up all the time. But if you run Twist of Fate on single, then, like, that even gives them more. So if they have a little bit of execute viability, and they also bring an extra PI into the raid, which, best case scenario right now, looks like on pure single, Shadow Priest is, like, a really, really good target for PI, right? And if that's true, then even in a situation where you get to AoE, like a boss like Generals, you know, you can throw it to a Hunter, you can throw it to X class, who actually gains a lot more AoE from the haste. So I think they're in a good spot right now. I think they are dependent on tuning, but I almost want to say they do have a clear role. Like, if you were to ask me right now, Shadow Priests weren't run this raid very much, and I think it was because of how important Cleave was on the last 2 Mythic bosses. But I think, especially with another round of gear, I think Shadow Priest are going to be, especially if Blizzard buffs their dots, I think Shadow Priest is going to be extremely insane, actually. It's interesting because it was in this list for the past, like, 2 expansions for the dot reasons, but now it's here for a different reason, I think. Off the top of my head, what are the best Covenant abilities in game? Honestly, Fey Guardians, dude, Fey Guardians for Priest is going to be so broken, dude. You're going to have Night Fae Priests, like, giving people, like, 40-second combustions, and who else knows what fucking broken-ass cooldown will be, like, really, really sick for some raid fight. You know? It's going to be so strong. How fast would a combustion have to be worthwhile to make it desync from raid buffs? See, this is my issue with, again, with Theorycraft people. Is some Theorycrafter would come out of the woodwork and be like, yeah, well, I mean, if you look at a 5-minute single target sim, offsetting it from this and this and this, which, like, offsetting combustion doesn't really do anything. It's fine. Like, they'll be like, oh, it doesn't really add that much. But it's like, dude, what if you're on a fight and, like, you have to burn something as important as a Goliath every 40 seconds, and Mage just has combust up every time for that? Or, for example, let's say it allowed some ability like Wild Spirits to happen, and it adding one Shadow Priest, Fey Guardianing one DPS player, it allowed like a Hunter to have Wild Spirits for every ad set because of the way ads spawned on a certain fight. You know? You never know until, and again, I know it doesn't work on Wild Spirits. I'm just saying, like, when you actually know a fight and you know when things line up, then you'll know. Like, a lot of people didn't know this because we didn't talk about it during progression, but we had our Shadow Priest swap Night Fae on, once we realized Shadow Priest wasn't going to be used for Denathrius or Generals, we swapped our Shadow Priest in on Generals, and we gave him Fey Guardian to our Fire Mage for a shorter combust, and we ended up not running it only because it didn't grant him any extra uses because he was holding it for the Goliath anyway. Now, imagine the Goliath spawn at a different rate. We would have already used the Fey Guardian thing in progression because it allowed some very insane carry cooldown to come up at the exact right time. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's going to depend on the fight and depend on the ability. And also, just before priests get super mad, it's also really good to use on Void Form. I'm just saying, like, there's going to be scenarios where it can be used on a different ability and be, like, fight-breakingly good. That's my point. It's so toxic to have PI and Fey other players. Yeah. You're not going to hear any other argument out of me. If it ends up being the case where it is optimal to run Shadow Priest, but only because they PI and Night Fae other people, I mean, obviously that's insanely fucking stupid and bad. But it's definitely a thing. It could be a thing. I'm not saying it is a thing. Like PI is good on Priest. Fey Guardian is good on Priest. It's good on them. But there is going to be a time in progression where it will be asked, again, if you're playing optimally, not just randomly, casually raiding in some guild. Like, if you're going for World First, there's going to be a time where Fey Guardian, this expansion, if unchanged from right now, and how it is on 9.0.5, is going to be brokenly OP to give to other classes. That's all I'm saying. Like, it is good for Priest, but you have to give yourself the scenario of you can reduce every single spec in the game's usually major cooldown, whatever was vision in whatever your vision reduced with that essence, where it would have to, Void Form would have to be the single best ability in the entire game to reduce if you were playing Night Fae, which, again, it's very possible, especially if it gets it near a 1 minute. Having 1 minute CDs is insane. It's so much better than 1.5, but it would have to be better than every other ability in the game. All right. Critique me / give me comments that you think I missed. BM is obviously dependent on tuning. So I already went over this for Hunter that you might have missed, but Hunter in general, if you just forget that Wild Spirits exist, is the most dependent on tuning class that's ever existed, and they have been for the past 2 years. They've literally done nothing special in raids for 2 years except for happen to be tuned really high, which I guess can happen to any class. So obviously you're better off in a scenario where you can be tuned high and you also have clear value. But the only reason Hunter is in this list, just to be absolutely clear, is because Wild Spirits is so unbelievably valuable for progression that you'll probably bring 2 to 3 just for that spell and no other reason. What you explained for Shadow sounds like it belongs in the other category. No, I mean, I think, well, there was a reason I was like moving it back and forth, but I actually agree with it being up here. I think Power Infusion is insane if you can give it to other people. And I think their single target right now is crazy, and I think it's for all the right reasons, and I don't think they're going to get nerfed, and I think they're going to scale really well. So I think they're going to be up there for that. Afflock is some of the best sustained multi-dot cleave out there right now. I think it is way better than Balance in that regard. It's possible that Affliction beats out Balance on 3 spread out targets. Like, for example, let's say you have 3 bosses like this, that are fully spread, I think Moonkin wins out, but your argument is that Affliction barely beats Moonkin. Is that your argument? I would still agree with Moonkin being up here ahead of Affliction, because if anything, it's really, really close. I'm pretty sure Moonkin wins, but let's just say Affliction still wins, Moonkin still has Convoke, so I completely agree. But here's where I was talking about. You start adding this many targets with one Moonkin in the middle, spread out like this. There's no class in the entire game that's even going to sniff a Moonkin in this scenario. Like, it won't even be close. It'll probably be by like 20 or 30%. Like, Starfall is actually like very, very good.